Well, look at what Lucasfilm did. They went and they actually dropped the Book of Boba Fett trailer out of nowhere in typical Lucasfilm Disney fashion. We were all set to do our Visions review, but then they dropped this trailer. So you know what that means. That means we're going to talk about it. We're even going to react to it. That's right. You're going to see the trailer. You're going to see our reaction, and it's all coming to you right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this delightful show. That's right. We are back, and this time we've got the Book of Boba Fett trailer. So now, did you know this thing was dropping today?
I had no idea, actually.
Because you basically, you texted me this morning or whatever, and you're kind of like, yeah, man, are we going to be doing Visions, or are we going to do the Book of Boba Fett trailer? And I'm like, the what? Wait, hold on. So I went immediately and checked on YouTube, and I'm like, oh, crap. And of course, I'm trying to play it cool, right? I'm like, well, we'll do the Book of Boba, like I knew about it or something, but no, dude, you broke that one.
Okay. I was wondering about that, honestly, but I figured like you already knew or something like that. But I figured you would have said something by then, though. But
I would have definitely said something. I wouldn't have been just like, and definitely, I mean, on one hand, it's kind of like, yes, every Monday we've been doing this Visions thing, but it's like, okay, man. I mean, it's not like we're super, I mean, even though little sneak preview to next Monday, unless they drop some like the Andor trailer or something, but I actually liked this episode of Visions, episode 5. But, we'll get to that. That'll be next Monday. You'll get our thoughts on that. Mm-hmm. And then I was going to hold it to Friday. I thought, well, okay, we'll do the Visions review, and then we'll do this Book of Boba Fett trailer, right? But I'm like, no, man. I mean, this thing it's new, it's hot. We do a live show, and I thought it would be cool to actually react to it. So,
plus, I don't want everybody to be talking about it, and we have no idea what,
Right. Well, and that's the thing is a lot of times, we end up being kind of late on that whole thing because, we'll hold it off to the next show or whatever. And then it's kind of like there's been a zillion videos about it. And then, we come in like, oh, look, and everybody's like, yeah, that was last week, man. We're on to the next thing. So It is nice to actually have a show the night or the day of something dropping. And of course, somebody that normally comments doesn't usually chat into the live stuff every once in a while. Brittany Taylor, she says, my main concern is that they are making Boba Fett the Talon card stand-in. Bonus points for the Talon card reference for me. Talon card's actually one of my favorite old expanded universe characters, but we'll get to we'll get to this trailer. I mean, the trailer definitely, one of the things that I really appreciate about this trailer is that it's super meaty. Like, you actually get a lot in this thing, which I didn't expect. I thought when you told me there was going to be a trailer, I'm like, oh, well, it's probably going to be like, some 30-second teaser thing or something, but it's not. It's almost a couple of minutes long, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you ready to react to this thing?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Yeah, man, because I really don't want to be that guy that, basically drags everything on and talks about it. And I really want to spend the bulk of today's show actually talking about it. So usually we just switch to the trailer or whatever, but you guys, we're not going to do that. You're going to see us react to it. So here we go. That creature's pretty cool.
Man.
I don't know what it is.
Bounty hunter.
It's like a weird spider.
Oh, and they gave him the, his helmet's a little bit dirtied up.
I like how they put the Lucas thing film with his colors, too.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you sit on the throne of your former employer. Jabba ruled with fear.
I intend to rule with respect.
So this is telling us something about his character now.
You were all once captains under Jabba the Hutt.
I'm here to make a proposal that's mutually beneficial.
This is cool to see like
Why
all of
speak
Boba's,
of conflict?
it seems like Jabba's palace.
Corporation can make us
Yeah,
all
you know
rich.
what? I really kind of like the whole underworld vibes that we're getting off of this thing.
What prevents us all from killing you and taking what we want?
Vibes too.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, double play.
If you had spoken such insolence to Jabba, he'd have fed you to his menagerie.
Please,
Fennec Shan.
speak freely.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be pretty cool, actually. This is looking good to me.
December 29.
Yeah. All right, so that was basically the trailer that we got. One of the things that jumps out at me right away is the fact that I like the fact that it is Tatooine based, which was one of the questions that we actually had about this thing is what are they gonna, are they gonna try to have Boba Fett go off world and have some different adventures? Because we were wondering about how much his empire was going to expand. Like, is it just going to be based on Tatooine, or is it going to go, and be seeded out everywhere? And we were also thinking in terms of maybe we might see some Mandalorian crossover, right? Like Din Djarin comes in or whatever. But this is really looking like it's Tatooine based. And even if some of these other organizations come in more off world, it's looking like they're going to be centered on Tatooine. So even if they're based somewhere else, they're going to come there. And this definitely, to be honest, I don't know, you probably haven't been reading these because you haven't talked to me about it much, but the War of the Bounty Hunter comics, yeah, it very much has that vibe to me. And that's why I'm wondering if we're going to see a character like Kira come in there a little bit later, or, how this is all going to play out. Because I don't know, I didn't actually detect too many of, like, I recognize some of the Thorians and stuff like that, but like there was that one group or whatever that he was talking to, and it's like, okay, well, is that Crimson Dawn? Is it Black Sun? Is it just some, I'm not really sure. That's where some of these guys they'll do these whole Easter egg videos or whatever. It blows my mind. They know like all this, they have this encyclopedic knowledge, which admittedly I've gotten away from the older that I've gotten. I definitely had more of that when I was younger, but now it's funny because one of the differences between me now and me when I was a kid, or even in my 20s and even early 30s, is that I've gotten a little bit more into the bigger Star Wars picture. It's like, yeah, I'm not really all about that knowing every little detail kind of thing. It's really more thematic that I go by now and that I enjoy. But, what did you think of this thing?
First of all, I love the way it looks. It looks kind of, it gives me like a mixture. I know this might sound weird, but it gave me a little bit of Aladdin, like as far as like almost like a live version of Aladdin, like just the look of the place. You kind of see, it seems like you're getting a bigger picture of what Tatooine looks like. There because we've already kind of seen like a limited parts of Tatooine. We kind of saw a couple of shops. We saw like, okay, where they race, of course, with the pie races, and then kind of out there in the where Luke lived. But
well, and then
you
don't
see more like
forget
the city
too.
now.
Well, and that was one of the things that I thought was really cool about the season premiere of The Mandalorian last year was the fact that we saw, I forgot what it's called, Mos something, but it was actually a different city. It wasn't Mos Eisley, right?
Right. It was like a different side of Tatooine where we ran into Cobb Vanth. Yeah. So the whole crate dragon thing. Yeah.
Yes, and that's one of the things that's really cool. And I'm glad you brought that up. Is that we're finally getting to see a little bit more of Tatooine as a planet. Because if you think about it, what we've seen up until then really has been Mos Eisley, and maybe a little bit outside of that. Because you mentioned the pod races and stuff like that from the Phantom Menace, but it's really most of what we've seen has happened in that one city or that one area of Tatooine. And now, like you said, I think it's branching out a little bit. It's becoming something a little bit more than that.
And then one of the things that it also kind of reminded me uh, of the '89 Batman movie when they were all sitting at the table, and this kind of reminds me of that whole thing when the Joker was sitting there. He was like, and the guy asked him like, "Well, what would you do if we say no?" He said, "Well, no one wants a war. We'll just shake hands and that'll be
That'll
it."
be that.
And and that's kind of what the vibe I got. It's kind of like everybody's kind of looking at the other mob bosses basically and just kind of trying to figure out like what do they want to do here. And I really want to see what Boba Fett really has planned because they kind of say like, oh, well, I'm not a bounty hunter. I'm this, and it's like, well, what is he really trying to do here? Like, he seems like he's trying to unite everybody into one thing. But what is that one thing? Is it kind of just one big crime family? Is it almost kind of like a hut type thing, but just with him at the head?
Yeah.
So
I
I'm
mean,
really curious about that.
well, sure. And that's what it seems like to me. It seems like, and that's why I was saying even while we were watching it, with our reaction, is that it seems like this is definitely going to be more of an underworld vibe. When what was that series he was going to do, 1313 or something like that, where it was going to show the Coruscant underworld. Okay, now we're moving into Tatooine, and it's going to be a little bit more of the traditional bounty hunter type of a thing. But it seems like what Boba's trying to do is run a more honorable, less violent version of the Hutt Empire. Because Hutts are still around during this time period, but Jabba obviously isn't. And so and that's the other thing that I was thinking about too. I can't say I was disappointed. I wasn't really disappointed by anything in this trailer, by the way. But one of the things that I am curious about to see in the show, because I know they can't jam every little thing in this trailer, right? Like, you got to save something for the show. But I'm really curious on how the other Hutts are looking at this, because Boba's coming in, he basically shoots Bib Fortuna. Now, you could go back and say, well, how did the Hutts feel about Bib Fortuna taking over? But at least he was, kind of
around.
Yeah,
he's like the underling to Jabba.
And I guess either one, they didn't really care that much, but Jabba is very much a major player in the Hutt. He's almost like the head of the Hutts. So you have the whole crime family, but Jabba's like the guy, right? So one of the things that I find really fascinating about this is, where are they? What are they doing? What do they think about Boba coming in and establishing this?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got to wonder about that. And it seems like Fennec Shan is kind of like his right hand or his second in command, pretty much. And so I'm wondering how that relationship is going to grow. Of course, like, are they going to keep it more business, or are they going to try to make a relationship out of that? I hope not. I hope it's more business than pleasure, so to speak.
It seems like that. I don't see this going into any kind of romantic vibe or anything like that. I see this as, you have two bounty hunters who can benefit. And again, this is one of the things I hope they explore in the show, by the way, because you see that in The Mandalorian, they already knew each other. Or at least it's implied. It is possible that I think that was in season 1, actually. Yeah, it was. Where we see Boba's boot by Fennec Shan when she was, presumed dead or whatever. And maybe he saw that, and, obviously she's had a reputation because we've seen her in the Bad Batch stuff now. So it could be that maybe she had a reputation, and maybe the alliance began then. He pretty much helps her, nurses her back to health, whatever, and she's indebted to him for that. And that could be why she seems so loyal to him, because we saw a little bit of that even in The Mandalorian, that she's definitely aligned with him. And it could be there. The other thing, though, is maybe there's more of a history here. Maybe it goes before the appearance in The Mandalorian. So I would
Yeah.
like to see that delved into a little more. I would like to see why Fennec Shan is so loyal to Boba Fett.
Now, one thing you don't see is, you don't see him telling about how he got out the Sarlacc pit, and of course, I think they're going to say that for the show, honestly. But I'm just saying, like, we don't get any hints that that's coming, So I thought that was interesting as well.
It could, but going on that though, it could
Mhm.
very well be that is just yeah, he got out.
I mean, yeah, it could be.
That's kind of like,
Yeah.
maybe they'll never, because if you think about it, we as fans are the ones that are up there going, yes, they have to tell us how he got out of the Sarlacc pit. It's a must. That needs to be
Mhm.
like an episode 1. I mean, if you even want to do an opening crawl, that's cool, but we need something, right? We need to know. Now, what they could do, which they've sort of been framing this all around, because again, the War of the Bounty Hunters comic has been centered around that in-between period, or I should say that time in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, what they could do is they could do sort of like a Book of Boba Fett comic series or something, to where maybe they delve into that a little bit, because they have been known to fill in gaps and stuff like that in the comics primarily, which is
Yeah, but
surprising. Oh, go ahead.
but yeah, like once again, kind of like what we will always say though, it's like if you show that in the movie, you have to explain it too, though. So it's kind of like we saw him go into the pit in Return of the Jedi, so you kind of need to show us how he got out of it in Book of Boba Fett.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, how could I, right? That's something that you and I, that's
Mhm.
kind of like one of our little tenets of Star Wars, right? Like this is
Right.
a thing. It's a rule. If you and really, I think that even beyond Star Wars, I think cinematically
Yeah, that's it.
speaking,
Within yes, yeah, exactly.
yeah, if you basically introduce a concept in a movie, then it needs to be explained in a movie. But the only thing that makes Star Wars a little tricky, though, is sometimes, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but on one hand, you can look at it like this. You can look at it like, look, all we really need to know from a story perspective is that he got out. I mean, it's really just the super fan that's kind of like, yeah, but how did he get out? That kind of thing. On the other hand, it's kind of a big deal. I mean, you're in this creature.
Well, I mean, it's
so.
it's obvious that he got out because here he is.
Well,
But that's what
yeah.
I'm saying. It's just kind of like.
Well, but here's the thing.
Right.
They could all they need to do, they don't even need to go into some crazy thing, right? All you need to do is just like, almost like a Family Guy thing, like, hey, remember the time I was in that Sarlacc pit and I got out by X, Y, and Z, and then that's it. It just needs a line of dialogue to explain it. We don't need a flashback. We don't need to see it. You don't need to dedicate an episode to it. You just have to say it.
I got you. I mean, but like I said, I just say it just needs to be addressed at some point. That's all.
Oh, no, I 100% agree with you. That's why, I mean, you were ready to move on, but I wanted to latch on to that point, because the Sarlacc pit thing is kind of a thing that's been a long, that's the other problem too, is the fact that the movie that happened came out in 1983. We've been living with this fact that he's been in the Sarlacc pit. And further, there's a legend story on how he got out. And that's why I think that you really have to address it too. That's the other reason why I think it's a little bit more pressing, and why when you just kind of mention that, I don't want to really necessarily say in passing, but you did mention that as a point, and you were going to move on. But I'm like, well, wait a second. I want to deal with that Sarlacc thing.
Well, and that's one of the things too, because if you really think about it, like, they made this whole big dramatization over it. It's like, 3PO made this whole declaration, for the whole mighty Czar, you'll be digested for over 1,000 years, and you'll learn a new thing of pain and suffering. It's like, okay, so you're making all this big grandiose thing about,
well, not to mention,
but put our main heroes in there,
exactly,
Han, Luke, and Leia. And then, at least Leia was, she was still in her bikini, but grabbing a tan. But
yeah, he wasn't going to put her in that.
No, exactly. He had other uses for her.
Yeah, he had other uses for her. It's like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna spare you from the pit. I mean, unless she made him mad
for myself,
right? If she made him mad, then see, the dancers get the rancor.
But and that's what I'm saying. So, like, okay, you're gonna drop, Han and Luke into this whole Rancor, I mean not Rancor, Sarlacc
Sarlacc.
pit. Yeah. So like you're making this real big, like walk the plank type thing. And then, Boba just accidentally gets knocked into the stupid thing. Now, how the heck did he get out? That's what I'm saying. Like you
Well, and
almost
to be
like
honest, I like the Legends. I really hope they keep that intact. I mean, there's certain things that they have been more or less cherry picking from Legends, and I mean, other than maybe shining it up a little bit and making it fit the current canon, I guess. They have kept a lot of things intact, right? They haven't changed everything. I mean, largely they've kept Thrawn's story intact, even though, again, they just plucked it out of this one time period and stuck it in another one, but it's essentially intact. So they could actually keep the legend story intact, which, if I remember correctly, it was just he got his jetpack working or something and he just shot out of there,
rocketed out of there.
Yeah, he rocketed out
Yeah.
of there. And that was pretty cool. Now, there's other things too, and this is what leads me to believe that maybe they're going to do this, is because Cobb Vanth having his armor. Now, obviously, the part about Cobb Vanth being there wasn't written at that time, because Cobb Vanth is a new canon character in the Aftermath trilogy, but the fact that Boba Fett's armor was taken and he had to get it back, that was from Legends. So it leads me to believe that they could leave the Legend series explanation intact. And honestly, there's really no reason not to. I guess they could come up with something better, or unless they wanted to plant a seed for something that was going to be a future story arc or plot point or something like that. And so they needed to establish a different method by which he got out of the Sarlacc. That's possible. But I agree with you. I don't really think that you can understate how he got out of that. That's a big thing that they really do need to cover.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I'm really curious about is the thing with I just go with the Mandalorian, right? So with Din Djarin, that's a brand new character for us.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We know he's like this Mandalorian, he's this gunslinger, he's a bounty hunter. All right. And so we first come in contact with him, he's all about just doing the job, and we kind of get that sense. But he can be a little cold. But as we see with Boba could be completely ruthless. My question is, but yet in this whole situation, he seems like he's just chill. Like he's not trying
Yeah,
to do
he's exactly almost like he's a little
so
bit more
this
honorable or something. Like he's
yes.
like a hero.
So it makes me wonder a couple of things. Is this how Boba has always been? It's just that whenever we saw him, the brief times, it was just business, and he had to establish himself as his reputation as just being this, you know, kick behind, bounty hunter, and that's just part of his mystique as being Boba Fett, so to speak. But then we've seen other depictions of him where, of course, when he was younger, how mad how mad he was at the Jedi, and how badly he wanted to kill Mace and everything like that, which is understandable. But we never really get to see, like, okay, well, the maturation of Boba Fett, like once he became 20, 30 something years old, probably that was probably who he was around Empire time. Okay, we never really got to see who that Boba became, who that Boba grew into. So the Boba that we're seeing now in Book of Boba Fett, is that the same one that we saw in Empire? It's just that we're now getting the opposite side of him, or has age gotten his situations that he's been in, being in the belly of a Sarlacc, for example, kind of changed his mindset on some things. And since he's been out, he's kind of see the way the Empire is no longer around. He's like, well, maybe I don't have to be this way. Maybe I can be something more. Maybe it's like something greater, and we've seen his compassion towards Finnick where he didn't have to. We've seen his loyalty and his compassion towards, Din and Grogu and everything like that. So we've seen this kind of like malevolent, or, version of, um, we've seen a benevolent version. I'm saying
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean,
benevolence.
I figured that's what you meant,
Yes,
but
yes, benevolent version of Boba. But has he always been this way, or did something happen? And that's what I'm really wanting to see, like get inside him. And I think that's what we're going to really get out of this.
yeah, I totally agree. I think that one of the greatest things about this is going to be the fact that he, without question, is going to have a lot of his characterization answered and then on display for us. Because if you think about it, all we've seen out of this guy is just a couple of quick scenes. I mean, he's become this iconic character, but if you really add up all of his screen time, it's not much. Now, granted,
20 minutes.
Exactly. Now, obviously, the Mandalorian series expanded that quite a bit. I mean, we actually have learned who he was, and right. So it's kind of like, oh, well, now we actually care about this guy. So it could be that what they're trying to do now is establish certain things. I mean, there were things that were always established about him, and you could put things into context, right? You could actually say, well, okay, when he was younger, things were a little bit more shady. But it really wasn't. The only reason why he was considered a bad guy is because he was always somewhat against the Republic. But really, Django
chasing.
Yeah, I mean, they were just kind of doing what they needed to do. Yeah, it wasn't like they were bad per se. Now, obviously, once Django was killed, Boba ended up getting mixed up with the wrong crowd, you could argue. And he learned from some of these people, and he definitely wasn't super honorable at that point. But then again, it's like you said, there's a lot of things that could have changed that. And in fact, the War of the Bounty Hunters comic seems to be more or less spinning him, I think, in a slightly different light than what we've seen before, even though he's got Han Solo with him, frozen in carbonite. And once again, it's just a credit to these guys' characterizations, how you can take something that you would think would be unforgivable and kind of spin it in such a way, and you're kind of like, okay, well, I like this guy now.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, it likens to, like I said, I often use, a Batman in this type of situation where, it's Bruce Wayne, he's great, he's lovable, he's, honorable, he's a good guy, but like as Batman, he's kind of like this vigilante with being that in and of itself is a crime. So he's a crime fighter that's actually really committing a crime if you really think about it.
True.
But but they kind of like let it go because it serves their greater good. But that's why a lot of people have issues with him. But when you look at, Boba Fett, he's kind of like the same way, like being a bounty hunter to the people that you have to track down. It's just like, and we saw that in the Mandalorian with the little blue guy. He's like, oh, come on, man. And he kept trying to talk him out of it. It's like, nope, no deals. It's just, look, I can bring you in hot or I can bring you in cold. It's all to you. He's not trying to be a jerk. It's like, I'm just doing my job. Your name came up. I got the call. That's it. Don't blame me. Blame yourself or blame whoever put you in this position. But it's not me. I'm just doing the dirty work at this point.
Well,
and
this is
so
exactly.
And that's kind of how when you look at like Boba, it's kind of the same way. He's kind of like, well, look, it's nothing, it seems at this point, he's always kind of been like, it's nothing personal. But he has that switch where he'll do what he has to do to get the job done and get home safely. And that's why he's created this image of Boba Fett where with the helmet on, he's like this feared bounty hunter that everybody's like, oh, that's Boba, don't screw with him. It's kind of like Batman with his mask. When Batman shows up, everybody's like, oh, it's him. All right, whatever. But then, at the same time, he can be reasonable.
Yeah, and to that, Dwight says good evening, and then he also says Mando was basically like, look, man, it's my job. And that's it. And that's what I think they're probably trying to characterize Boba as well. But
him, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that a lot of things, though, see, the difference between Din and Boba is that Din is just trying to figure out, one, where he fits in with the whole Mandalorian thing. And especially in season 2, he learned that it's like, oh, well, the Mandalorian wasn't what I really thought it was. And so he has to come to terms with that. And he's just trying to, I guess, make his way, in the universe, kind of like what Django said. Boba, though, obviously has a little bit more goals than that, because he's putting together this, he's like, no, forget that. I'm taking over Jabba's empire. He has an end game in mind. And I think that a lot of his characterizations are really going to depend on, why is he rebuilding Jabba's empire? Now, on one hand, it seems like he's getting ready to get into some shady criminal type stuff. But then on the other hand, it's kind of like he's trying to be cool about it, though. He's trying to be like, look, man, I want to run this with respect. I'm not trying to throw everybody into a rancor pit here. I just want to, everybody wins, basically.
Right.
But we'll have to see, though, how that actually plays out, because we don't really know what his end game is for rebuilding this organization. And I think that that's going to reflect on the kind of person he is, has become, always was, whatever the case may be. But I mean, overall, man, I thought that this trailer was spectacular, and actually it made me way more excited for this series.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to know, like, how he's going to try to, and that's the thing too, we've seen Boba be cunning and I guess in his business, in some ways, like, of course, how he tracked down the, Millennium Falcon, being attached to the ship. I mean, to the Star Destroyer, he was cunning in that. He's shown some, some things over the years. So I'm wondering how he's going to do it as far as being this tactician, or trying to get these hostile bounty hunters and all these other guys to kind of side with him and, get on board.
Well, he
I'm really
definitely
curious to,
seems like he's got a plan.
Yeah, definitely.
And
And he's not
obviously he's got
afraid.
Finnick around to enforce it.
Yep.
So it is going to be interesting. I mean, I have to admit, it is going to be kind of a fascinating thing, because this trailer has opened up a lot of different possibilities for, one, where the show could go. I can see now why they've renewed it for a second season. I always thought that the idea that this thing was one and done was probably a mistake if they had kept that, because there's a lot of story they could tell with this. Now, Dwight brings up a good point, though. He says, I wonder who will be the big bad. So every series, especially in Star Wars, has to have a villain, right? Some major bad guy, basically. And you have to wonder who it is. And based on this trailer, we really don't know, because all we've seen is a bunch of different groups or organizations or people or whatever somewhat approach him, and Boba basically saying, no, you guys, basically, he's going to be in charge, and they're going to have to accept that. That's at least the vibe. I mean, if I had to summarize the trailer, it's all about him building this organization and trying to unite all these people, but basically also saying that, I want to build this with respect. I want to do all this, but it's going to happen. I'm pretty much in charge of this stuff. And, it could be, because, you know what? The possibility is maybe there is no big bad guy. Maybe it's Boba and the opposition of these various criminal organizations, and he has to deal with each one of them, get them in line.
Yeah, almost kind of like how Han had to deal with, like, Conjure Club and what's the other one that?
Oh, I know. I never remember.
but like when they all kind of like compile, like, on the ship, and he was trying to, like, make deals with, like, everybody at the same time, and everybody's kind of like, no, you said that to, last time, and you promised them this, and so, like, he's kind of like the hub to all these people. And so I think that, Boba's going to kind of find himself in that situation where, okay, he's got to try to make peace, like, because there may be some groups that don't like each other, and he might have to step in and try to like, you know, be the bridge builder between those two. Um,
Yeah, almost like
so
how
yeah,
Cobb
I'm
Vanth was, in that one town, right? You had all those like
exactly.
pirates and different organizations, and his presence kind of kept all that in line.
Yeah. So yeah,
Dwight,
it's really gonna be interesting.
it
Okay.
is. It totally is. And Dwight agrees, says that would be interesting to have no major arcing villain, and that would actually be a really cool thing. And you could do that. And this would be the series in which you would want to do that, where you basically
Not,
have a situation like what you just said,
but I could also see, to your point, what you said earlier. Crimson Dawn might come in and try to overtake because, like I said, they're all about absorbing stuff. So I can kind of see them trying to absorb Boba's thing, and Boba is like, "Nah, I'm not going anywhere," and that could eventually kind of
Well,
turn
yeah,
turn things on its
you
head.
could. So, in other words, it's one of the So you have all these other organizations or whatever. But if you take a name one that everybody knows from Star Wars, like a Crimson Dawn, and maybe you bring Kira
Or
in,
Black Sun, right? Yeah.
and she now kind of becomes a bad guy. I mean, it's interesting how you could spin all this, because in Solo you're kind of rooting for her, and you could tell that even when she's in Crimson Dawn, she still loves Han, and she's still trying to help him out and everything, but they kind of see themselves on opposite sides. It's a little bit of a Lost Stars thing, actually. So, it's interesting. Now, Dwight has a couple of comments. First, he says, no one makes money in war except for those making weapons. And that's true. You could actually frame this thing around all the stuff that's going on, the fall of the Empire, all these different factions. Now that you have the Empire and basically breaking off into these different groups, you could say, okay, now who's going to align with who? So you definitely have something like that you can exploit. But then he goes on to say, would there be a Crimson Dawn during this time period? It's implied that there is, only because the War of the Bounty Hunters series, even though it takes place in between Empire and Return of the Jedi, you have to remember there's only like a year between those two movies. And then after Return of the Jedi, we jump forward 6 years for The Mandalorian. It's presumed that the Book of Boba Fett takes place at the same time as The Mandalorian, and we're going by that assumption. But even then, in the War of the Bounty Hunters comic series, which again takes place in between Empire and Return of the Jedi, Kira basically is taking Crimson Dawn. It's almost like the return of Crimson Dawn. So Darth Maul has fallen, but she's more or less taken over. She ends up fighting Darth Vader and surviving. I mean, she doesn't beat him, obviously, but she does survive. And you find out that, and there's other, like I got a batch of the comic issues, or the new comic issues that deal with all this. It's like the latest ones. And some of them are crossovers with War of the Bounty Hunters, and they're dealing with Kira quite a bit. And so I'm looking at this a couple of different ways. In universe, Crimson Dawn's becoming more and more powerful in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So it's not a stretch to believe that they move on. Now, you can make the argument, though, that by the sequel trilogy, maybe you don't hear about them so much. But we'll have to see. The out-of-universe type of a thing is that it seems like them bringing Crimson Dawn into this comic series and trying to bulk them up a little bit seems like they're positioning Crimson Dawn to play a bigger role in some of the other series. And so this is a good way to introduce them. And so I think that's something that you have to look at. Now, Dwight also says, I'm not familiar with this series. I got some catching up to do. Well, yeah. So just so you know, over the past, 4 or 5, 6 months, whatever it's been, you have the War of the Bounty Hunters issues. But then each one of the other series, Darth Vader, the regular Star Wars, Dr. Aphra, they even had a couple of like lesser bounty hunters or something. But all the major issues or major series have a War of the Bounty Hunter crossover. And so what's happening is you've got the War of the Bounty Hunters proper, which is chronicling basically what happens when Boba Fett is trying to take Han Solo to Jabba, and how all kinds of stuff. We're led to believe in the movies it's kind of like, okay, Blue Slave 1 and boom, there it is. But that's not the case. At one point, Crimson Dawn gets him. Then the Empire comes in because Kira was basically bidding out Han Solo to the highest bidder. But then the Empire came in and took him back. And so, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And you're getting all these different perspectives in your Dr. Aphra comic, in the Darth Vader series. And it's all going on at the same time. And it's super cool. It's really... if you love Star Wars and you really want a good chunk of canon stuff, because not every book, not every comic needs to be read, but there's a few of them that I say you should definitely read. This is one of them. Because not only is it filling in some blanks that are kind of fun, but I think they're actually setting this stuff up for the Ahsoka series, for the Book of Boba Fett, for the Mandalorian. I think that there's a method to their madness in this case. So you going to start reading
it? I will try to.
Yeah, well, at this point, it's not insane, but there's, and they're quick reads too, but there is a lot. You do have a little bit of catching up to do. But these are the kinds of things, though, that I think that are actually benefiting Star Wars as a whole. And this is something that you and I have talked about a long time, is that instead of compartmentalizing, so you have your movies, and then you have a TV series, and you have books and comics, and they all kind of live in their own little universes and tell their own unrelated stories. Oh, sure, they might reference something. Like you might get a novel that references the Battle of Yavin or something like that. But now what they're doing is they're actually crossing over. And you're getting things that maybe start out in the book and you'll see it appear in the series and vice versa. And it seems like they're really trying to tighten this universe up a little bit. And I think that just strengthens it immensely.
Oh, yeah. I think that's a cool world building tool that they are trying to implement, and I think that's what's going to make, like we always said, it's going to diversify Star Wars in such a way where people can get what they need from Star Wars, even if you may not want the whole vision. You can kind of, it's almost like you said, choose your own adventure. You can kind of go down this path of, all right, I kind of like the Western stuff, bounty hunters, underworld. All right, I'm stick over here. The Jedi and Sith, and I don't care about that. This seems more realistic to me, so I want to watch this. Okay, cool. Then you have your own lane that you can kind of follow. And then, but if you're into the whole Jedi Sith thing, then you got the Acolyte, you got Ahsoka, you have all that other stuff going on, Obi-Wan, But if you want to see the whole picture, then you have all of it, So it's a really cool time for Star Wars right now.
Well, and it's funny you bring that up, because when I basically shared the link to this show on Facebook, one of my friends had written in basically and said, that they thought that the trailer was cool, and he didn't really like the sequel trilogy that much, but he loves all this other stuff. And you're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of now this cherry picking what you like in Star Wars, where before it was kind of like a united thing. It was almost like you had to like all of Star Wars or none of it, or maybe the most you would get is, well, I like the movies, but I don't care about the books or something like that. But now you can even be more focused. It's almost like there's certain areas or story arcs or whatever that you're really into. Kind of like you said, well, I kind of like more of the bounty hunter, smuggler, pirate, that kind of thing. Well, now you're actually getting material that deals with that. That's one of the reasons why I say it's a little bit dangerous when you put Luke and Grogu on the stupid poster for The Mandalorian Season 3, because it's like, well, what are you telling me? is it one of those, in case of emergency break of glass, now we're going to bring Luke back into it or something? I mean, it's like you don't have to have the Jedi and the Sith in every single story that you do. And this is coming from a guy that's probably my favorite element of that. Right. But you know what? I'm getting really deep into the non-Jedi Sith stuff. And I mean, you still have other stuff, right? There's still the High Republic. The High Republic is going strong, and it's great. Visions.
Yeah, Visions. You probably got Rogue Squadron stuff. That's probably going to start spinning off its own thing. You have even like I said, Rogue One was like a of course the kind of the catalyst, no pun intended, of it all, because you got a chance to see a Star Wars film without, aside for the a couple of scenes with Vader,
yeah,
it was pretty much without all that, and it was so engaging.
Absolutely, Rogue One was definitely the test case for that type of a thing. And other than if you take out that phenomenal scene at the end with Vader, the movie still stands.
Absolutely,
it's a lot cooler with it though. But
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Dwight's got a couple of things. He's got a question. He says, with all the connective tissue, it does create an actual world for Star Wars. And it does. It's always been there. It's been there ever since the expanded universe came to be. That was really the thing, right? They had a few comic stuff like Dark Horse and stuff like that. But once Zahn wrote the sequel trilogy in his mind, and that launched the entire expanded universe, that is when you really started seeing a Star Wars world building. But now, it's connected in a way that it never was. Because before, you always had Lucas saying, okay, it's not actually canon unless it came from me. And the way that he sort of threw a little bone out to us was, he would take certain storylines from the expanded universe, put them in the films in order to canonize it, because fans really like something that they read. But now you have this really deep connected tissue all throughout, to where you're getting some serious world building now, and they're really able to fill in gaps, with the movies like the original trilogy or the prequels or whatever the case may be. But then they're also able to expand things and then seed out different stuff, which I think is great. He says, keeps bringing up the poster. I feel like we should bring in a counselor at this point. Break out the couch, Daryl. Talking about that Luke and Grogu thing. Well, that's because it's true. Dwight's absolutely correct. I do keep bringing it up. I'm going to keep bringing it up because...
Oh, yes, he will.
It concerns me. In the sense of
feeling about this.
Well, I think that it's kind of a weird marketing trip, for one thing, right? Because the idea was that Luke goes and trains Grogu, and that takes Grogu out of the main story, and now you can deal with Din trying to find his place in the whole Mandalorian thing. You've got the Darksaber issue.
Bo-Katan.
You got with Bo-Katan. You had the whole Mandalore stuff. You've got Moff Gideon. You have a lot of things that you need to deal with, in my opinion, for season 3, that if you start trying to rely on the Luke and Grogu thing, don't get me wrong, I'll love it. If it focuses on that, I'm not going to stop watching the show.
Of course not.
It's not like it's a deal breaker. But I do think that this show was created to focus on this Mandalorian gunslinger type of character and be kind of like a Western version of Star Wars. And it's kind of if you keep shoehorning the Force into it, you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, it's going to take on that whole Phasma thing, where you wasted a character that you could have done so much with.
Yeah, exactly. Now, of course, Dwight also agrees that Rogue One proved that they could do this whole non-Force thing and it'll work. And then he goes on to say, a lot cooler with the Vader chopping down everyone in the corridor using the Force and his Crimson Blade. Yeah.
Yep.
Look, the Force and the Sith and the Jedi are the coolest thing about Star Wars. Let's just put that out there.
It's the backbone of it. Really.
It is. It is. It really is. Because a lot of times people complain about it, but it's like, guys, it's a fantasy sci-fi. Well, it's really more of sci-fi fantasy film. Fantasy, you know?
Mm-hmm. Like, you
If it
don't cry
were,
about Harry Potter, when he's, casting spells left and right and riding
well,
brooms
and I think it's because that is more pure fantasy. And I understand where people get a little bit confused because there are a lot of the sci-fi elements in Star Wars, no doubt. But the thing is that it's really a fantasy, and it's like a fantasy wrapped in a sci-fi container.
It's set in a Star Wars. I mean, it's set in Star Wars. It's fantasy.
Yes,
set
it is.
It's fantasy set in a science fiction setting.
Right.
Basically.
It's in a science fiction setting. Exactly.
You just put fantasy in space, basically, and that's
right.
all it is.
Exactly. Instead of dealing with wizards and swords and sorcery and all that, the swords are now lightsabers and, that kind of thing. So I get it.
You still got dragons, crate dragons, and everything like that. I mean, really, it's kind of like if you put like Harry Potter in Lord of the Rings, or not Lord of the Rings, maybe even Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones in a way, that whole type of vibe, and you kind of set it in space.
Well, now that's Dune. Dune is 100% Game of Thrones set in space. Like, almost as a template. Completely. Because you got different houses, like the house of, is it Arades or something like that? They're all kind of warring with each other. It is absolutely 100%. And that's one of the reasons why Dune has always been basically marketed as Star Wars for grown-ups. That's how they originally marketed it in 1984. Problem is that the David Lynch version was a little bit strange. And that's usually how people think of when they think of sci-fi. They think of some weird esoteric kind of thing. And one of the things that George Lucas did was he boiled it down to themes. He gave you the hero's journey. He gave you, a lot of these things that are familiar to everybody. He gave us the whole Saturday cereal, that everybody used to, like your Flash Gordons and stuff, which is another kind of sci-fi fantasy. In fact, I brought this up before, but the whole reason why Star Wars was even made was because Lucas tried to buy the rights to make Flash Gordon, and he couldn't get them. Yeah, they wouldn't let him do it. So he's like, screw it, I'll make my own Flash Gordon. And thank goodness he did. Or this would be a Flash Gordon show. Probably. Maybe. Okay, so now Dwight has a question for you. He says, so Daryl, are you telling me I can find Jabba at Jabba's palace? Referencing Daryl saying Star Wars is set in the Star Wars setting. And I didn't actually read that. I didn't read that full question. I didn't actually read that before putting it on there. That wasn't like, oh, this is insulting. Let me.
Dwight is such a jerk, but you gotta love him. But no, yes, Dwight, and also you can see if Woodchuck would too. So it's all there.
Part 2, the series,
right?
Well, and that's really what it comes down to, though. Is that there's a lot of. That's the thing I think that makes Star Wars really cool. But again, what it suffered from is just being around for a long time. And it's remarkable how popular it still is. Because if you look at any other franchise, look at Star Trek. Star Trek has suffered from, it's the same kind of thing. Gene Roddenberry, well, he actually died though. But even before he died, he was sort of backing off from it a little bit. He gave Rick Berman more control with The Next Generation. And he was just trying to kind of influence everything a little bit. But then he passed away. And everybody sort of got their hands into it. They're making their own stuff. And I like a lot of the Star Trek series that you're seeing now, but still, it gets a little bit convoluted. And Star Trek fans are still pretty much complaining about it. And that's because the franchise has been around forever. And that's what's happening with Star Wars. It used to be that it was, well, pretty much my generation, actually, that started with it and kind of had ownership of it. And so as long as it was this one, maybe two generations that had ownership of it, everybody kind of agreed and it moved on. But see, now you have everybody from, 10-year-olds to 80-year-olds that are into it, and people want different things out of Star Wars now. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that you're seeing with some of the toxicity. But they can solve that by, like what you said, and we've talked about it on shows before, is you just make, okay, this, maybe you're not into this series, so there'll be another one for you.
Mm-hmm.
The Mandalorian is for people that kind of like more of a Western vibe, kind of like the bounty hunter smuggler thing. That's why I think that it's dangerous to start trying to shoehorn different elements like the Force, because now you're really defeating the purpose. Yeah. But it's cool. Don't get me wrong. I love seeing Ahsoka in the thing. Well,
yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of sprinkle it in there just to like it makes it feel once again like Star Wars. It kind of gives that vibe, and that's how they did with Rogue One, because I mean, Vader had two scenes in the thing. He had when Krennic came to meet him, we saw him force choke him. All right, that was one, and then of course at the very end when he went ballistic and wiped out everybody in the corridor. But outside of that, you didn't have any exposure to the Force. I mean, they even mentioned stuff like Jeddah. All right, you saw the Jedi, little statue kind of in the sand. So there's inferences and references to certain things like that, but you don't always, like you said, you don't always need to have it. But if you sprinkle or you pepper it in there every so often, it's not that bad.
Exactly. And I mean, let's face it, the Jedi were a really big part of the universe.
Exactly.
So, to have that,
the reason that they're
sure. I mean, that would almost be like saying, well, let's make a movie. But again, it's kind of like this. You can make a movie and not feature the police in it. I'm not talking about the band. I mean, like the actual
law enforcement.
Right. You don't need law enforcement is there. Everybody knows it's there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be featured in whatever movie that you're doing. And if you do feature it, maybe it's a few scenes. That's what I'm saying. It's like you just don't have to focus on one element. Yes, we know there are Jedi in the galaxy, but that doesn't mean that they have to pop up in every single series that they do. Because let's face it, even at the height, there was only like 10,000 of them, and you had this whole galaxy. So, Dwight says, yeah, right, sprinkle it in with references or stories. It does not have to always be shown. And that's it. And I think that that's where the danger comes in. And that's why I get a little bit nervous when they start, trying to sprinkle this stuff in, because it almost seems like they're doing it. And this is where the business part creeps in. And what they don't understand is if they just follow the art, the business will come. They don't necessarily have to think with the marketing and the business thing first. That's not what Lucas did. He just made an independent movie he wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
And Dwight also says, Mando not know what a Jedi is was nuts in the same vein, by the way. Mr. This is the Way does not know a prominent man in his culture was a space wizard. Well, and this is another thing that I'm constantly, as everybody knows that's seen this show, that was one of my biggest issues with The Rise of Skywalker, is that you got these guys who pretty much, the Jedi were the peacekeepers of the galaxy. I mean, even in the High Republic, right? They're around a couple hundred years. They're all over the place. Okay, they disappear for like 30 years and suddenly everybody acts like they don't know what they are or who they are. Now you go into The Rise of Skywalker. Now keep in mind with the Sith, there's only been 2 of them at a time, and half the time they were in shadows. Usually, if you saw any of them, you only saw one. But now, you look at The Rise of Skywalker, and everybody's like, oh, well, that's Sith language, and this is Sith. And, they're throwing the word around like, well, wait a minute. How you guys even know all this stuff? You're just like some citizen or whatever, and you're throwing this stuff around like it's been there forever. But with the Jedi and the Force, you're like, oh, wait, you mean that was real? It's... I can't. But that's part of the problem that you run into.
All right.
All right. Well, on that note, you got. So, what are your final thoughts on the whole trailer? Because remember, that's what actually the show was about. Was the Book of Boba Fett trailer?
Yeah, I mean, the trailer was good. I think it was. It gave us enough to kind of see where the show was going to go. Um, I think that there's some questions that we definitely would like answers to, like the Sarlacc, and how Boba Fett got to this place at this point in time, and of course why Fennec Shan is so loyal to him. So I think there's a lot of good things to uh to chew on here when it drops on December 29th. So I'm anxious for it. I just, like I said, I think that it's going to be hopefully just as good as Mandalorian, which I believe it will be. So
yeah,
I'm good with it.
I'm right there with you, man. This actually has made me look more forward to it, because one of the things that we were talking about whenever we would address this is, by the way, Dwight says, my bad, I may have moved the convo off topic. Yeah, that just doesn't exist. That's actually why we do this show, is because
Yeah.
so many YouTube shows, it's kind of like they're designed for the algorithm. They're designed to market increase. And, don't get me wrong. I mean, I would love to actually have more viewers and get more discussion and all that. But ultimately, this is kind of a niche-based show. This is a discussion show where it's kind of like we want to make this the online version of a bunch of friends getting together, in a restaurant or a bar or whatever, and just talking Star Wars. And that's what we're simulating. And one of the fun things about this show is you never know where it's going to go. But as it relates, though, to this trailer, it really put in perspective what this show was going to be about. Even though we sort of knew, we didn't really know how it was going to be handled. And it was nice that you can get a feel for the universe. You can get a feel for what this show is going to look, how it's going to feel, a little bit of the character interaction, some of the stuff. It puts some context for us. And that alone makes me way more excited for this show. And I was already pretty excited for the show. And honestly, I think Robert Rodriguez, who was basically the showrunner, and I think he directed every episode of the show. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure he did. He basically said that this show over-delivers. I remember when he said that in an interview not too long ago. He was like, yeah, man, we over-delivered on this show. And it's like, okay, one, that's a pretty bold thing to say. But seeing this trailer, though, I could see why he said that. And I agree. I think that maybe he did over-deliver. And I, for one, cannot wait till December 29th. It makes me wonder, do you think that we're going to get another trailer for this? Or do you think this is it?
I think this is it.
We
might get a like a little 30-second one, another one, or
like
something
TV
like
spots or something,
Yeah, but nothing like this one though.
Yeah,
because we're so close at this point.
That's true. I mean, we're only like a month and a half away, so that's really exciting to say too. So, Once again, don't forget to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, because hey, we want to talk to you guys. Remember that we stream live every Monday, every Friday at 8 o'clock. And then you definitely want to, who knows what we're going to talk about Friday now, right? Because who knows what's going to happen between now and then. But in the comments section, we already heard from Dwight. What did you guys think of this trailer? Did it make you more excited? Did it make you less excited? What are your thoughts? Make sure you leave them in the comments section. So until Friday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.